Hello, welcome to Therapy, where I, your host Shaheem, talk about all things mental health. It is my goal with this channel to make mental health care accessible and as much as I possibly can, hopefully point you in the right direction as far as mental health resources and encourage you to get some care on your own. Have you ever found yourself caught up in a negative mental health loop where you keep thinking negative things over and over and over and over? Do you think that your thoughts might contribute to you feeling anxious or depressed? Do you notice these patterns or habits in anyone else that you love and care for? This might be the episode for you. While this is no substitute for therapy, I hope that this is going to guide you in the right direction. Today, we're going to be talking about cognitive distortions. By the end of this video, it's my hope that you'll walk away understanding a little bit more how the way that we think and how mental loops can impact our mental health, including the way we think, feel, and behave, and ultimately how that contributes to things like depression and anxiety. So what exactly are cognitive distortions? Cognitive distortions, put simply, are patterns of thinking that are either irrational, inaccurate, or biased. Think of it like a mental lens through which you process and see the world, yourself, and others. Another key marker about a cognitive distortion is that it can cause us to see situations more negatively than what they are, which can fuel mental distress. One example that I like to give is imagine you and your friend going to get dinner at your favorite restaurant. You show up on time and you realize that your friend is maybe 5-10 minutes late. You are texting their phone and they're not responding right away, and you start to think things like, they hate me, they're ditching me, they aren't showing up, maybe I did something wrong and they're trying to punish me. That is catastrophizing. It could potentially be something that is completely unrelated to you, but because you have this negative pattern of thinking that could be rooted in things like low self-worth, you jump to things that are kind of the worst case scenario. Another thing you could say in that scenario is, wow, I can't even plan anything right. Nobody shows up for me or wants to show up to my things on time. That may be an overgeneralization, because I'm sure if you look back in your Rolodex of memories, you might find that there's somebody who actually has shown up for you. These are just some examples, and I'm going to get a little bit more into detail so you can understand a little bit more the different types of cognitive distortions. I will note that once these patterns of thinking become habitual, they shape the way that we view the world, like I said before, and our psychological experiences, which could lead to things like depression. It can also lead to anxiety. For example, someone with anxiety might participate in mind reading, which is a cognitive distortion where you assume a lot of things about what a person is saying or thinking about you or things related to you. That can include, and often does, the assumption that people are judging you, which can lead to a constant state of fear and worrying. But like I said, it could also contribute to depression. One cognitive distortion that often leads to depression is filtering. Imagine you're in school and you get your report card back. You have all A's except for one B minus. That B minus may become the entire focal point of your report card if you are using a mental filter. This can look like focusing or hyperfixating on the negative aspects of things to the point where you completely miss the good things happening or the positive. This can lead to a compounding feeling of hopelessness and lead to you also feeling feelings of worthlessness. At its core, cognitive distortions can amplify emotional distress and fuel things like depression and anxiety. These can lead to other mental health struggles, and it's a cycle that's pretty difficult to break out of. But the good news is once you become aware of what the cognitive distortions are, you are more able and capable of stopping them dead in their tracks and challenging them as they come up. Now that you have a basic understanding of what cognitive distortions are and how they can impact your mental health, let's go over some of the common types of cognitive distortions. Catastrophizing. This is when you expect the worst case scenario out of any situation, even if there is no evidence supporting the worst case scenario. Essentially, this can look like imagining disaster in even very mundane and ordinary situations. Like I said before, this kind is particularly distressing because it can generate a lot of anxiety and leave a person fearing for the worst case outcomes that may never and often never do come. The more you catastrophize, the more likely you are to feel anxious and overwhelmed. Not to mention that this can lead to avoidant behavior, like avoiding doing things that you really want to do or not living up to your fullest potential because you're afraid that things might go wrong before you even start. Next up is going to be black and white thinking, sometimes referred to as all or nothing thinking. This kind particularly is about viewing yourself, other people, situations, things as one way or another. There is no middle ground. There is no gray area. It's 100% this or that. If something isn't 100% perfect, it failed. it's a failure. If somebody doesn't 100% support you in everything that you believe, they are your enemy. They're against you, or they're not really a friend or your supporter. Do you understand how dangerous that could be? One of the more sinister parts of black and white thinking is that it really stunts your growth. If you are so wrapped up in the idea of things being 100% perfect, you often find yourself feeling worthless or frustrated because there is no such thing. It also does not leave much room for nuance or the reality of life because most things are very nuanced. You might be familiar with this one if you are on the internet more than just 2 hours a week. Next, overgeneralization is when you take one or two negative experiences and you use that to paint the brush of life itself. This could be you taking 2 or 3 negative experiences and using that as the rule for the rest of your life. A very common example of this that I see as a therapist is surprisingly around friendship. Imagine you have 2 friendship betrayals, or you have 2 friends who kind of just treat you really crappy. Then after those crappy friendship experiences, you say, well, I'm never gonna have friends, or I'm not the type of person who can have friends, or I can't trust anybody. People are crappy friends. Everybody does it. And the reality is that's not the truth. In fact, it is very far from the truth, and you just might be around people who you misalign with. That being said, overgeneralization can lead to resignation. You can feel afraid to even try anything, or it can block us from being able to see any future opportunities for growth or change. Carrying this type of thinking may lead to you avoiding new experiences or taking chances, which are very necessary for you to get to the next stage or level wherever you are in your life. You may be so convinced that your last experience was so bad that that is the only way that things can be. And I'm here to assure you that is very far from the truth. And while these distortions may feel very overwhelming when you realize what they are, or you may feel like there's no way to overcome them because it's how you've been taught, how you've been indoctrinated, or how you've just experienced the world, I can promise you, once you become aware of them, you can challenge them and start to break them apart. We're going to explore a little bit further in this part of the video how you can actually challenge these distortions on a day-to-day basis, or really just try and create a more balanced perspective in how you view and see the world, yourself, and others. First technique is going to be identifying and reframing. This is where we get to play detective of our own thoughts, right? When you find yourself feeling anxious, depressed, worried, stressed, or any of those things, and you have these thoughts pop into your head, you have to question, is that really true? Am I the worst person in the world? Am I always doing things wrong? Is life all bad? You have to question these things once they pop into your mind. An example, imagine that you are doing a presentation at work and you mess up or you stumble, and after that meeting you're like, I always mess up. I am really bad at giving presentation. If you weren't paying attention, that is an example of an overgeneralization. What it would look like to identify it is to actually question in that moment, do I actually mess up every presentation just because I stumbled one time? Does that mean that my ability to present overall is completely bad? Am I being fair to myself? Or am I overgeneralizing and making one mistake way bigger than what it actually is? Then once you identify it and you question it, that's when you go to reframing it, right? Yeah, I may have messed up in this one meeting, but I don't mess up in all of my meetings. And one of my favorites though is if your friend, okay, because we all have that one person in our lives, the most important person in your life. If that one important person in your life came to you and said, hey, I mess up all of my meetings, would you tell them I agree? Please say no. Likely you wouldn't tell your friends or the person who you love most that they are completely right and that they do mess up everything. So I suggest working on how you talk to yourself, because oftentimes we have more empathy for other people than we do ourselves. And this is about challenging that. Talk to yourself how you would your best friend. What would you say in that moment if your friend came to you and said the same thing? One good way to track your process though is to journal. If you can write down these thoughts as they come up, and you can actively write out how you're challenging them and examining whether or not they are the truth. I suggest going into this with the mission in mind. You are trying to rewire your brain to be more positive. Go in it with that in mind. One example of how journaling and just tracking your thoughts can be effective. Imagine you are facing rejection in some way and you believe that that is a reflection of your worth and value. I am never going to be good enough, for example. When you have that thought, you can write it down, and then you can actually start to write down questions underneath of it. Has everybody rejected me that I've ever known? Are there people who think that I am good enough? Are there people who care about me? Are there people who love me? Is everybody mean to me? Is there anybody who's kind to me? Is there anyone who sees me? Simple questions, I know, but still questions that can help you challenge these beliefs as they come up. The next tool is going to be evidence checking, really examining whether or not you have the evidence to support your claim. For example, go back to the presentation at work. When you stumble across your words and you say something along the lines of like, I mess up every presentation I've ever had, I want you to ask, do I have the evidence to support that? When you have a negative thought, I need you to ask, do I have the evidence to support that? This also works with catastrophizing, right? When you're sitting at that table waiting for your friend to get to the restaurant and you assume that the worst thing ever happened to them, you can ask, do I have proof that something bad happened to them? You can ask, do I have proof that they hate me or that they're trying to punish me? Do I have evidence for any of these things? I promise you, as someone who has used this technique themselves, a lot of the times you're going to find that you don't. But it's about building out the habit of challenging and asking yourself about it to begin with. I hope that these tools were helpful. I hope that this video was helpful. There's, of course, a lot more to learn and know. And I hope that you practice this on a daily basis because it really can help for you to rewire your brain. And thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe and like and comment and share and do all of the things. This is a new channel. This is me doing longer form content. Just so you know, you are probably doing a lot better than you think you are.